Hi, everyone. Welcome to Module 3. Good work so far. I'm really enjoying your perspectives on our course and getting to know you a little bit more as we go on. I haven't had a chance to read through all of the discussion posts this past week. I only had a chance to kind of dive in, and then I taught class yesterday, and I'm up here teaching class, on Zoom today. So I need to make sure that folks have material and I want to make sure that you know how to access the material this week. So I'm going to spend some time quickly talking about the overview of Module 3. So let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump in here. And hopefully that's sharing my screen. I asked it to. There it goes. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at what I've got posted here. So let's pull up the outline. And the outline looks like this. Maybe. This computer is sluggish. Oh boy, this could take a while. Oh, if we have a Snickers bar to deal with my slow computer tonight. Okay, so I'll go over the student learning objectives, and I do have some reading assignments. You'll see there's really just one kind of intense reading assignment here. And I think that's about 8 pages. There are it's Dubianda and Fleety and others. It's kind of reflections on the ACE study. So it kind of continues our discussion from the past week. We're going to talk a little bit more about what has happened since the ACE study now this week. So you can go in and watch Vince Felitti. I can't remember whether this one is the 13-minute or the 90-minute version. If you want to hear one of the authors, Dr. Felitti talks there. This is good at minute 10. So if you I don't expect you to watch all 48 minutes of this, but if you go into like minute 8 and watch it probably to minute 13, this is some older research, but it does take, it's probably about 15 years old now, but it does take our neurological awareness and kind of put it in perspective. And we're a little more nuanced now, 15 years later, with all of our fMRI technology on specific brain areas. But this was still solid science, and it's talking about the impact of cortisol on brain development. So I want you to pay attention to that. I can't remember that one. I do want you to watch the Harvard Child video series, and I'll share those in my PowerPoint as well. Those are important. I'm not going to rely as much on Nadine Burke-Harris. Really, that's optional if you want to watch that. She's really passionate about helping others. And so I'm going to go into this one here a little bit. So just worry about the discussion. I had originally put up a module quiz, but let's not do that. We're about the discussion board, okay? You all have enough to do. There's a lot of material here. So this is my quick lecture, and we're going to talk about, and you'll see this in the PowerPoint, talk about normal brain development. So I included a really long, it says optional PowerPoint on brain development. It really comes from, it's modified from when I taught human growth and development, but it really takes a look at how our brain grows and matures from birth to adulthood, and even into adulthood. And so our brain really grows like a small sapling, a small tree. And we have the structures and the cells up there, but they're not really connected. They don't have all the synapses. They don't have all the connections. And that's what happens as we grow as people, as we grow as infants and toddlers and children and youth and adolescence and up into early adulthood and on into our later adulthood. We have this thing called arborization, and arborization is making new connections in the brain. Think of Arbor Day, the tree day. Arborization is the process of making new connections in the brain. And so, brain architecture review, we'll go over that, and you'll see that in some of the videos. There was a long time here with the ACE study where people were really kind of downgrading it. Well, it's like, it's just correlational research, and you can't infer causation, if it's correlation. But here's the thing: we've gotten much more sophisticated in understanding biology on a very molecular level, very, very small, um, uh, microscopic type of level functioning, even with our genes. So, even since we cracked the human genome in 2000. And so what we see is that if a person has too much cortisol when they're growing up, they're under a lot of stress. It really, it changes brain development. And I'm purposely using change. The authors of the study are very firm now that they don't want to use the term maladaptation or dysfunction, because honestly, when people are going through chronically stressful or adverse environments growing up, the brain grows to survive. We adapt. We make all these new connections, this arborization, to adapt to our environment so we can survive. And so, I think it's a misnomer for us to, we have this positivistic kind of worldview that, we have the answers, we can go and save everybody, and it is good, I think, to try to make an impact. I'm not saying don't try to change like mild child maltreatment at all, but I'm also saying when we're working with adults that have been through, and even older children that have been through maltreatment or adverse experiences, was that their choice that their brain was wired this way? Because their brain really is wired to survive. We're not wired to become dysfunctional. We're wired to, if we're in a hostile environment, where we should always be on guard. If you take some of those children have grown up in some really adverse environments with a lot of stress and a lot of chaos and put them in a combat zone, they'll probably survive quite a bit longer than a person who is, used to just relaxing on a beach or not having any stress, because they're not able to discern, and they're not on guard for the potential, harm that could come to them. So, as you listen to the effects of cortisol in some of these videos, be careful how we label dysfunction. But the brain does change. We do have neural changes. And so we talk about the brain regions being affected, the amygdala, that's being responsible for regulating our emotions. The hippocampus, directly related to memory. We have the hippocampus is a lot smaller. The amygdala is a lot smaller in folks who have gone through a lot of stress growing up, a lot of adverse childhood experiences. Cerebellar vermis, which coordinates movement, that's smaller. And the left and right ventricles are actually a little bigger. Again, there's videos that talk about this, but and so we see structural brain changes with increased cortisol, increased stress, increased adverse experiences. So the science is really filled in here. There really aren't any debates about the validity of what happens when somebody's under a lot of chronic stress. Where the debates are happening is how to foster resilience, what creates resilience, and we'll talk about that as we proceed, but we're not quite there yet. Emotional consequences. First of all, with the smaller amygdala, people are typically on guard. In other words, like a child in class, if another kid, kind of looks away real fast or gives them, a look that they can't interpret very well. What do you want? You got a problem with me? Come on, let's go. It's like that's hypervigilance. It's misinterpreting social cues to where you're automatically defensive. And so you've seen that. You've probably done that yourself on some occasions where you misinterpret what's going on and you become overly defensive. And it's really this flood of cortisol that starts to really shut down our higher thinking. Think fight versus flight, and really activates kind of our animal brain. The lower parts of our brain that are just made more autonomic in nature, where your heart starts pumping faster, you start to breathe, you feel your fists clench up, and so think about the behavioral consequences for somebody who's been in a really chaotic home where the relationships are volatile, or you've had a lot of unsuccessful relationships with adults, being modeled. Think about those behavioral consequences and also the long-term health consequences. And then even as we go throughout this course, think about the societal impact, with systems and working with other people who have been through a lot of these adverse experiences. So that's a quick lecture. I'm trying not to spend too much time. I do want you to read the article here, which is from the authors of the ACE study. Come on, open up. I'm trying to keep this going fast for y'all. So it's not like a 30-minute video. And you're like, oh gosh, here he goes. He's going to talk for 30 minutes. Only if my computer responds to me. See, it is 8 pages. So it talks about, the big design, 17,500 folks in the study. So you're welcome to look over that. Let me go back here. And this for sure, this is optional, but it goes over brain development. And just, again, I'm not gonna, you can watch some of these. I'm not gonna make you particularly responsible. What they have found, let me talk about this for a minute. What they have found is that, and this lady here, she's talked about this a lot, that ACEs really affect us genetically. ACEs tend to get past some of these genetic tags, some of these genomes that are activated. Those tend to get passed on to the next generation. So somebody who's been through a lot of stress then passes, and you're like, well, how can that happen? Watch some of these things on epigenetics. Epigenetics is fascinating because epi basically means above genetics. It's more than just, your XY chromosome and all of those others coming together and fixing, our genetic code. It's, our what we're finding is our environment really changes our genetic code and can flip different tags and things on. So on or off. So I think that's important to consider. This is probably the crux of the material for this week. So it's talking about the trauma-informed care. And I do want you to watch these videos. So I basically share a lot of videos here, and I want you to indulge, particularly in the ones that talk about child maltreatment. Here's the one that's this child maltreatment, and the child Harvard studies. I want you to pay attention to those. This one, you don't have to watch the whole thing. This is the one I said watch about minute 8 to minute 13 or 15. That's that one. And what we'll talk about in the course is, and this is important to kind of read through. We'll talk about in the course is how do we overcome. And you'll notice this TFCBT. This is really the structure that we're going to use to really tackle this later on in the course. We're talking about actual techniques to work with kids in particular here, although we're not going to just isolate with working with kids. And as you talk about your discussion this week, I want you to think about possibly interacting with adults who have been through adverse childhood experiences. So the brain develops till about 25. That's, pay attention to this slideshow if you don't mind. And not if you don't mind, you're going to need it. And here's your discussion board. Dun, 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 dun. And there's nothing there. So you'll want to go to the discussions over here where it says, generally speaking, in what ways might this knowledge about the effects of adverse childhood experiences impact your interactions with others? How might clinicians, counselors, school counselors, and others use this information to help guide their treatment and decision making? How might this information influence you personally? So, think about where we've been the past couple of weeks and try to surmise how this impacts you. Anyway, I don't want to go on too long. I look forward to what you have to say this week, and I look forward to grading. Please pay attention to, I noticed a couple of you are not quite meeting the rubric, so I'm going to give you some feedback in the in your grading, please pay attention to that and go back and read the discussion rubric for help. Anyway, always reach out if you have any questions. I'm relatively available by email. Say that I'll respond during the week, hopefully in about 24 hours, unless I'm completely swamped. Anyway, good job so far. Keep up the good work. See ya.